about that. All right, so we are ready to start. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Dana Lewinter. I am the Director of Municipal Engagement at CHAPA, and thank you for joining us today at our first regional meeting. We're going to have these over the next 2 months, every Wednesday or so. But you guys are the first region that we're working with. We're really excited to speak with you about the North Shore and Merrimack Valley today. I'm going to do a couple of really quick housekeeping things before we get started, and then we'll go from there. So please, as usual, keep yourself muted while you're not speaking, just so we can hear the speakers as they go forward. This meeting is being recorded, and we will share the recording on our website when it's available. Feel free to keep your video off if you're not comfortable being taped, but there will be a discussion section later. Definitely feel free to ask questions in the chat as we're going through the presentations. And if you're not comfortable asking your question publicly or commenting publicly, you can send it directly to my colleagues, Whitney and Lily. Whitney Demetrius and Lily Link, you can find them in the chat and send it directly to them, and they will share with the group anonymously. We will have plenty of time for questions and reflections and discussion after the presentations. We'll also be pausing for questions after presenters for clarifying questions as well. And we will be sharing a lot of links in the chat. So we will share all of those via email after the session. So don't feel like you need to be furiously writing them down, but you can also click the 3 dots at the bottom right of the chat box, and it will save the chat to your computer if you want to get all of the information that's coming in the chat from your colleagues in your region. So with that, I'm going to get started. Thank you again for all being here. Let me quickly share my screen. And I'll just look for a thumbs up from some folks that you guys can see that. Excellent. Okay. So thank you, first of all, to our regional meeting sponsor, Bank of America, which makes it possible for us to come and normally be out in community with all of you, but this year, as last year, doing it virtually. It's really great to see all of you and to have Bank of America supporting us as we do this work. Thank you to our local participating co-hosts, many of which will be familiar to you all from the region. You can see a list of them here, and we're going to be hearing from them further on in our program. But really, thank you for all being here today and helping us to think through the needs for your region. Fabulous partners for all of us, not just today, but throughout the year. So I want to tell you a little bit about CHAPA. First, I wanted to do a quick poll. Can folks see this poll I just launched? All right, so just a couple of quick questions to understand who you are and where you're coming from. So take a second to answer these. I think it's just 3 questions that I have for you. Actually, yeah, the last question, don't answer it. It's an accidental untitled question. But we're just looking to see if you've been to one of our regional meetings before, what type of group represents you. Are you a community resident advocate? Are you an elected official, etc.? And what do you see as the biggest challenge facing your region or community right now? So we'll give just another minute or so to complete this poll. And as we're completing the poll, again, if you're just coming into this session, if you can share in the chat your name, the group or the community that you represent, and something you're looking forward to or optimistic about in the housing world. All right, so we're almost done with the poll. Just a couple of stragglers. So I think wonderful. All right, I'm going to end the poll. All right, so a little over half of you have been to a CHAPA regional meeting before, which is great. So there's some of you who are new to this. The largest group of you are service providers. I know that it's hard sometimes to categorize yourselves, so you had to pick one. But we also have a lot of housing developers, statewide agencies, residents, and municipal staff and elected officials with us. And by far the biggest challenge facing local communities and regions right now are housing costs. So no big surprise there, but thank you all for answering those questions. Oops, excuse me. All right, so CHAPA is, for those of you who this is your first time coming to one of our regional meetings, CHAPA is a statewide affordable housing organization. We encourage production and preservation of homes that are affordable and accessible to households with low and moderate incomes, and we work to foster diverse and sustainable neighborhoods through planning and community development. For more than 50 years, we've advocated for opportunity at the local, state, and federal level. We've worked to expand access to housing through our coordination of the Massachusetts Homeownership Collaborative. We monitor thousands of affordable homes across the state. We administer mass access, and we develop the affordable housing field through trainings and forums and our Young Professionals Network, our mentorship program that we run with the Mel King Institute. I hope some of you were at their breakfast this morning. It was a really uplifting and inspiring event to start the day. We work to bring together a broad group of stakeholders, and we believe that together we can build a better future for everyone in the Commonwealth. This is something we've always done in Massachusetts to shape the future we want for ourselves. The affordable housing challenges that face our state really put us at risk of losing the very things that make Massachusetts so great. And the urgency of the COVID pandemic and racial injustices demand that we rethink who we are and what we want to be. Because we know that the decisions we make right now will determine our future. And if we do this well, we can ensure that every person has an affordable home in the community of their choice. There are a lot of big challenges ahead, many of which we'll talk about today, and we want to hear from you. But we also know that our goals are achievable to make it so that everyone in Massachusetts has a safe, healthy, and affordable home in the community that they choose. So I'm really excited for our agenda today. We're going to hear from our policy team about state and federal updates and priorities. We'll hear about our fair housing efforts, our municipal engagement initiative. We also have someone joining us from the Northeast Legal Aid Eviction Defense Outreach Team to talk about their ramping up of their program. And then we'll hear from our regional co-sponsors on the challenges and opportunities they see for this region. We definitely want to hear from you. You know your communities better than anyone else, so please share your challenges, strategies, and concerns so that we can all learn. And with that, we'll get right into the agenda, and I will hand it off to the policy team. Abi, I think, is up first.
Hey everyone, my name is Avi Kurve. I work with Ryan and our policy director, Eric Chopin, for the CHAPA's policy team. And we do a lot of advocacy for affordable housing priorities in the State House, as well as facilitate and manage a lot of committees and coalitions from where we get the ammo for these policies and just a lot of input, and together we are able to advocate and have successfully gotten some really good policies through the legislature over the last couple of years. So diving straight into it, last year was a very different year. Last session was a very different session, but one great thing that did come out of it was the housing choice. That was something that we had been advocating for a while, and we are really happy that that got through the economic development bill. So it was basically a number of changes to the state's zoning law 40A, and that were enacted at the start of this year. The idea was to address zoning issues or the zoning barriers that had restricted a lot of housing to be built over last couple of decades in many of the towns and cities in Massachusetts. I mean, as an affordable housing policy organization, we do see that the supply side of housing and affordable housing is definitely restrained, and this housing choice basically addressed that issue and removed some of those barriers to ensure that we are able to produce a little bit more than what we are doing right now. And we are really glad that these tools are now available for cities and towns that they can make use of and really build up their housing supply and reduce some of the housing cost burden that is there for many people in the state. So it provides it provides that certain zoning ordinances can be enacted by simple majority instead of a supermajority. I'm happy to provide many links about the details of it, but it basically allows multifamily or mixed use development in an eligible location by simple majority, by right accessory dwelling units, by right open space residential development, and things like, there's a whole list of things that can be done by simple majority instead of a super majority. And there is no opt-in, and it applies to all cities and towns except Boston. And it is currently in effect. The one great thing that came out of this law was it did not just provide these tools, but it also provided certain, I'm sorry, did the presentation just go off? I can keep going. So it did not just allow for these tools, but also made sure that communities that are not using this would also impact some of the grants and capital funding that they are getting through housing choice. So that was a really great thing that was included in this law. Thank you for bringing it back again, Dana. Next slide. So as I said, there are many qualifying changes that can be simply done by a simple majority by right multifamily housing. The trick here is what counts as an eligible location, and there is a definition for that. It basically defined as areas by the virtue of which infrastructure, transportation, access, and existing underutilized facilities or locations that make highly suitable locations for residential or mixed use smart growth. So there's also a lot of guidance that is expected to come out of DHCD. And so we need more, so that we have more understanding of what exactly can be counted under that. But it's still a really great thing that we are able to have these districts and are able to have these zoning changes that would allow for more development to happen. So this is just a whole list of things that can be passed by simple majority. It would also allow modifications to bulk, height, yard size, setbacks, and open space, parking, and many building coverage regulations that would allow for additional housing units to be built. So I'm going to quickly run through that. And I'm also, there is a whole, we have a whole list of resources that I can share, which delve into these things in detail. For the time being, I'm just quickly going to go through some of these things. Housing choice also, so housing choice basically allows the simple majority. It has the multifamily zoning requirement for MBTA municipalities, and then it also has other changes that streamline permitting and other legal challenges that come up. So zoning by special permit allows multifamily housing or mixed use development, as I said, in an eligible smart growth location. This basically gets together the integration of housing and transportation, in which we are trying to make sure that as there is transportation, the areas around that are allowing for higher density and allowing for more development to ensure that that districts are actually walkable, that transportation is more accessible, and that it's actually, developed in a smart way. And so that is what this some of these provisions allow to do. They allow by special permit an increase to the density in a particular multifamily or mixed use development, ADUs detached or in the same lot, and reduction in amount of parking required for a residential or mixed use. So many of these things we have been fighting over the years to address, to ensure that these are not barriers that come up for affordable housing development. New requirements that MBTA community shall have at least one zoning district of reasonable size. Again, what counts as a reasonable size is the crux here, and we expect more guidance to come out. We know that DHCD is taking input from many stakeholders to make sure that the guidance that is going to be coming out is comprehensive. As I said, municipalities that do not comply will be ineligible for housing choice grants, mass works grants, and certain capital funding that is coming through the state. Although this doesn't go into effect till 2022. So for the 2021 cycle, all the communities are still eligible for those. And this is just a quick map of what counts as MBTA communities in our links. We will have a full list of which communities are MBTA communities. as I said, there was also a third component. With the MBTA multifamily requirement, it requires, as I said, DHCD is going to issue guidelines. There are some preliminary guidelines that are still out. I'm going to be sharing a link on that. And for the purposes of the grant programs, MBTA communities will be deemed in compliance with this new section until more detailed compliance is established. As I said, all communities are still eligible for the 2021 grants. So here are some of the links. I'm just going to quickly share the same thing in the chat box. Moving on to some of our current affordable housing priorities. I mean, with one of the housing choice being one of the main one of our main priorities last session. This session, what we have tried to do is build up on that through our legislative as well as state budget priorities. We have a whole list of state budget priorities, and I just want to highlight three of them. The mass rental voucher program. As we are getting so many more federal resources into the short-term rental assistance, it's important that we look at long-term permanent rental assistance as well. And we have our own state program, the MRVP, that caters to that. We have seen increases in that program over the years. That means that there are more vouchers available for families to access, but the one thing, the caveat is that there's also a lot of money left over in that program over progressively more and more over the last couple of years. And so one of our advocacy pushes has been to make sure that there is full utilization of those dollars, and we are ensuring that more new vouchers are being issued and families who are on the wait list are able to access it more quickly. And same thing for public housing. We are very glad that public housing has seen a good increase in the funding over the last couple of years, and we hope that that continues. Same for the state's alternative housing voucher program, which is for people with disabilities. And you can find a full list of priorities in the chat box. Just a quick note, the housing committee chairs changed this session after a long time. And so we have two new chairs. That also means that we have opportunity to connect with them and be more vocal about some of our issues and just have a fresh perspective. So we are really excited to work with Representative Arciero and Senator Keenan on the housing committee this session. So just to quickly go over some of our legislative priorities, as I said, we're trying to build on the housing choice. Our housing production bill sets a statewide affordable housing production goal to ensure that affordable housing is also a part of all of these efforts that are ongoing for increasing housing supply, requiring multifamily around public transportation across all of Massachusetts. So right now the MBTA requirement is only for MBTA communities. We want to, our vision is that it extends to all communities, so that all communities, even those who do not have the MBTA access, are still ensuring that they are doing their part in building affordable housing and ensuring that they are contributing to this solution. And also including ADUs by right. We have many more provisions in that bill as well that just build on what Housing Choice has provided for. The other thing is codifying MRVP to make sure that MRVP is a program that is currently just through the state budget. It's codified into state statute, and so is more permanent and is not so vulnerable to changes in the budget cycle every year. So that is one of our main priorities, to ensure that MRVP is expanded, it is fully utilized, and it's strongly established in the statute. Right to counsel is, as we are seeing evictions, going up, although we'll know what happens after June 30th, but we do expect that we will have more evictions. And unless we take efforts, we take some steps, that they will be back to where they were before pandemic levels. And so making sure that there is full legal representation for residents with low income who are facing eviction, because we know that there's a big imbalance on landlords being represented more, having more legal representation than tenants. And so those are some of the bills that we are trying to ensure that there is addressing for the eviction crisis that was ongoing before the pandemic. Uh, Also, state legislative highlights restoring public housing. We have bills filed that will ensure that we are able to leverage new resources for rehabilitation and redevelopment of public housing. Definitely, we know that we are one of the few states that have our state's public housing portfolio, and ensuring that that is maintained through enough resources is crucial to ensuring that we have the housing, and we are preserving the housing for residents with low income, and also creating more revenue for affordable housing through increase in the deeds excise that could potentially raise 300 million annually for affordable housing and climate change. And so there is a there's a link in the chat box on our full list of legislative priorities. We also have a lot of fair housing stuff that I'll let Whitney cover, and federal priorities coming up with Ryan. So thank you for that. Please feel free to post any questions in the chat for me.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Abhi. And I'm Ryan Dominguez. I'm a policy analyst for CHAPA, and I help to manage all of our federal advocacy. So I'll talk a little bit about the federal relief funds that are coming to Massachusetts. There's been a lot of money that's been coming in over the past year, but I'll focus on the most recent package. So as you may recall, back in March, President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan Act. You may also hear it referred to as ARPA. And that brought in billions of dollars in resources that can be used for housing. And the first one you see up on the slide are the fiscal recovery funds. These are some funds that can be used for a number of different sources, including addressing the public health crisis, filling in gaps in revenue for the state government, but it can also be used for housing. And Massachusetts is eligible to receive around $5.3 billion in fiscal recovery funds, which will be handed out in 2 tranches. So they received half of it last month in May, and then they'll receive another half next year around this time in May as well. So you may have seen that the governor came out with a plan just this week to use some of these funds. And that plan actually includes $1 billion for housing. 500 million was allocated for home ownership, and 500 million was proposed for rental housing production. CHAPA was really happy to see this amount of housing dollars being allocated from those fiscal recovery funds, and we're actually going to be coming out with our own priorities for the rest of that money. So be on the lookout for that in the coming weeks. However, it's not just the states that are receiving these funds. Many of the local cities and towns, as well as counties, are also receiving this funding. And if you can go to the next slide, I'll show some of the cities and towns that are actually receiving these funds in your region. So you'll see here that Gloucester is receiving around 17 million, Haverhill is receiving around 25 million, and Lynn is receiving around 56 million. You also see a few counties on here in your region that are receiving millions of dollars. And if you don't see your city and town up here, then they're probably one of the non-entitlement communities. And you'll see that there's a large portion of money that's gone to the state to distribute out to your local communities. So, be on the lookout for these funds. You can really have an impact by really advocating within your local cities and towns and trying to become part of the process and asking them to really allocate a portion of this money towards housing. In terms of eligible uses for these funds, you can advocate for your city or town to use the money for rent, for mortgage or utility assistance. You can use it for housing counseling or legal aid to stop people from being evicted or facing homelessness. You can also use it for affordable housing development, as well as for services for the homeless, such as supportive housing. So throughout this slide deck, I've included links to the Treasury guidance about what you can and cannot use this money for. So as you're putting together advocacy plans in your local communities, I would definitely recommend clicking on some of those links when we send out the slides later, and really look through some of the housing options that you can use these funds for as you advocate. And if there's anything else that we can do to be helpful in terms of understanding what you can use that for, please feel free to reach out to us. I'd be happy to walk you through some of that guidance. So going on to the next slide, there's also a number of different housing specific resources that have come through the American Rescue Plan. The first one here is the emergency housing vouchers. These are vouchers that are exactly like Section 8, and they're specifically targeted for people who are experiencing homelessness or domestic violence or on the verge of housing instability. So specifically, you'll see that there's around 1,700 that were allocated to Massachusetts, and of that total, 917 went to DHCD, and the Lynn Housing Authority actually has 18 to give out. So if you're in the Lynn area and you know somebody who could really use one of these vouchers, I would really recommend reaching out to the Lynn Housing Authority to get one of their 18 vouchers. Or if there's somebody outside of that region, reach out to DHCD and they may be able to provide that family, that person with an emergency housing voucher. There's also the Homeowners Assistance Fund, which can provide resources so that families can stay in their homes and they can pay for their mortgage, utility costs in a similar way that emergency rental assistance has been doled out. And then there's also the home funding, which people may know that's a normal, federal program. And there's around 125 million in home funds, which can be used to create housing and provide supportive services for those who are experiencing homelessness or on the verge of experiencing homelessness. And Lynn specifically received $3 million of these funds, and the rest of the money went to the state. So again, there will be a process that is put forth that your cities and towns can apply for that home funding and be able to use it for these resources. Next slide, please. And finally, as many of you know, there's been a lot of emergency rental assistance that has been coming to the state of Massachusetts. There's been a number of programs that have been created to dole out some of this emergency rental assistance, including RAF, which we already have, but there's SHERA, there's ERAP, and all of this funding is going through some of your regional agencies, but they've really tried to make the process pretty streamlined so that anybody who needs it can get funds, right away without having to go through tons of different, processes and barriers where you have to prove a lot of information. So if you know people who are struggling to pay their rent right now, or landlords that can really access this funding on behalf of their tenants, I would say to please click on some of the links that are provided on the slide, and it really walks you through how to apply for some of this emergency rental assistance. So those are kind of an overview of some of the COVID resources that have been coming through Massachusetts. Right here, you'll see a COVID-19 housing resources and guidance in Massachusetts. If you click on that link, it'll bring you to a page with a number of different resources that you can access as tenants, as advocates on behalf of tenants, or as landlords in order to access some of these resources. And if you go to the last slide, please. In terms of getting involved with your local communities, as I mentioned previously, a lot of money is going to your cities and towns, and there will be a process that is put in place to allocate some of that funding. And I would say that you all have the ability to, come and advocate on your own, or you can contact your state legislators, the local municipal offices and decision makers to really get some of that funding towards housing in your local communities. And then outside of that, moving forward, you can always join one of CHAPA's committees, see what we're working on in terms of policy and other initiatives, and really have your voice heard in some of these committees. And you can click on the link that's provided in this slide in order to do that. And with that, I'll pass it back to Dana. Oh, to Whitney, I apologize.
No worries. Thanks so much, Ryan. There is really so much to be excited about. That really it's a time certainly of much relief and redressing and restoring, especially after the last year that we've had. And so much exciting things to share, and kudos to the policy team and the work you all have been doing. So I'm excited to introduce myself, Whitney Demetrius. I am the Fair Housing Engagement Director at CHAPA, and excited to share as part of this regional meeting some fair housing initiatives and updates, some additional things to be excited about during this time. So certainly on the federal level, the Biden administration has done a great deal in the time span they've been in office, really to build back better in fair housing, right? In terms of redressing discrimination and housing practices, certainly around sex discrimination and affirmatively furthering fair housing. So I wanted to highlight 3 of those for us as we talk about what we are excited about and seeing. So on the next slide, it's really talking about a memo back in January that the Biden administration issued, really talking about redressing the history of discrimination in housing practices and policies, really rooting that in historical patterns of segregation and sort of charging, right, the HUD secretary in the office really to think about what things are necessary to conform and to change. And so we've seen some of that happening so far, and so excited as well to also share about sex discrimination, right? On the next slide, we talked, there was a memo back in February that they shared. As we know, under the Fair Housing Act, are several federally protected statuses: race, color, national origin, sex, familial status, and religion, right? And so under this particular memo, sex discrimination was then expanded to also include protections for sex discrimination, to include discrimination based off sexual orientation and gender identity. And so that is a really, really exciting move forward to include individuals who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. So excited for that. And then lastly, restoring the affirmatively furthering fair housing definitions and certifications. And so we know in the last former administration, there was a rescinding of the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. But there is most recently published by the Biden-Harris administration, the restoring of those definitions and certifications, basically very similar to what was under the Obama administration. And so there's a comment period for folks who are interested in making comments on the content thereof by July 12th. So imagine that I'm amongst friends and you all are as interested in making sure that that's something we see federally. And to that end, I have to give kudos to our policy team at CHAPA and certainly to our leadership, because CHAPA now has our fair housing sort of legislative priorities, the legislative agenda, right, that has really come together around 3 pieces of legislation. So we have exclusionary zoning, disparate impact, and affirmatively furthering fair housing. So really, really excited because these particular bills are sort of as a package is hopefully is the first step really to start to address these larger issues across the state as it pertains to fair housing. The exclusionary zoning bill, our sponsors, Rep. Barber and Senator Cheng Diaz, it's really working to prohibit restrictive land use zoning and permitting decisions that perpetuate discrimination, right? It prohibits discrimination against affordable housing developments or housing that is suitable for families with children, right? So you can't say, no, we don't want to build this new development near a school. It's going to attract kids, and what that means for our community. So thinking about that and its impacts, for instance. So affirmatively furthering for housing, as we know, federally it was rescinded in the former administration, but we're exploring and really looking at, right, what does it mean to have that on the state level? So this bill will really create a statewide duty to affirmatively further fair housing and create inclusive communities. And it really will work to create a commission, which will establish how communities must meet in order to get at furthering fair housing in a real, tangible, local way. And so lastly, we have disparate impact. Excited for our co-sponsors there, Rep. Rogers and Senator Boncory, similar to the last one with affirmatively furthering, which I didn't mention, as well as Santiago, so that's exciting. But the disparate impact is really to create a statewide disparate impact standard to protect against discrimination, despite what the intent is, right? So there's intent in discrimination, and despite what the intent is, what are the impacts for protected classes? And so excited for really develop this agenda, and as well to be able to do that as alongside our local partners, you all. So we invite you all to give comment and to help us and guide the work. So we wanted to talk a little bit as well about local level initiatives, right? So across the Commonwealth, what is happening locally around fair housing, right? So across the Commonwealth, there are fair housing commissions and committees and human rights commissions, and more recently, a resurgence of diversity and inclusion officers and other organizations that roles are really focusing on fair housing, which is really, really exciting. Some of the roles they take on is education and outreach, providing assistance for people who experience discrimination, right? And local and state advocacy to promote open communities. However, we know that there is a need for much more on the local level. So I dare not ask us to raise our hand if we know if there's a fair housing committee locally in our municipality, but this is some of the things that as part of our fair housing work at CHAPA, we're really, really interested in. We have revitalized our CHAPA Fair Housing Committee at CHAPA. So we invite you all, if you are interested, to join our committee, join our group. We're really looking to meet periodically with stakeholders across the state, diverse stakeholders, right? Your job may not be that you're a fair housing director, but it overlaps with fair housing and you have an interest. We want you as part of this effort. And so part of this also, this work is to really begin to start mapping some of the fair housing work that is happening locally across the state. We want to have an idea as well what is also needed in terms of our efforts. So what you can do now, you can join a local housing coalition if you have that. Similar to some of the work that we have, we're in Lynn, have a Lynn Housing Coalition through our Municipal Engagement Initiative, which we'll talk a little bit later, but you can work to maybe even start a housing coalition. You can revitalize your local fair housing committees and commissions, right? And work alongside them. You can also contact your municipal officials and decision makers if you are interested in some of our fair housing legislative agenda as well in terms of supporting that. You can contact your state legislators, and you certainly can join our fair housing committee. And so thank you to my colleague who shared a lot of those links to those resources in the chat, and we hope to hear from you more and even during the discussion about what you all are working on for housing. So I'll pass it over to Dana to talk a little bit about the MEI program.
Thank you so much, Whitney. I'm so excited that we have this revitalized fair housing work and that the Municipal Engagement Initiative gets to kind of marry those two pieces together. I haven't seen any questions yet in the chat, so I'm going to keep going, but please a reminder, if you have questions, throw them in the chat, raise your hand, virtual or otherwise. So I'm just going to very briefly talk about our Municipal Engagement Initiative and invite you all to engage with us as we do this work. We come from this idea, and probably you guys have seen this report many times. Go to housingpolitics.com to learn a bit more. But the researchers at BU, Katie Einstein, David Glick, and Maxwell Palmer had done this study, shows that basically when you're talking about meetings that are related to housing, compared with voters, commenters were really disproportionately white, male, older, homeowners, kind of persisted across all the different kinds of communities. And what it leads to is more opposition to housing, less proponents for housing showing up, and really pushing development out of affluent communities into less affluent communities, gentrification, displacement. You guys know the story. Well, that led to this what we knew to be true was the creation of our program, knowing that community support really can make or break housing at the local level, but many communities don't have that strategy or coalition to build support. That's where our Municipal Engagement Initiative really came in. So we work to really support the efforts in each community and create a welcoming culture for housing, especially affordable housing, bolstering what's already going on in local communities, and also growing the number of people who are supporting production in their community, putting people in the community in power to make decisions to move forward with their affordable housing and housing strategies. We are now in, I don't know, 15 some communities where we've run the process, but we all kind of have a different place that we're starting from. We've been bringing together peer-to-peer groups. Very briefly, what we do when we start this process is we kind of identify a core group of people and start building partnerships and having conversations. We launch with a big, what we call our launch meeting, and we start to grow and take actions and come up with a process to really move forward. We do have a toolkit on our website with sample agendas to start a meeting, stakeholder list, because what we really want people to be thinking about is expanding beyond the usual suspects. Housing is the kind of the center of everything that we do and care about, and we want to make sure that, you know, people who are involved with environmental groups in local communities, with pedestrian groups, with small businesses, disability advocates, they're all part of this conversation because we know how critical housing is. So check out that toolkit to see the kinds of activities and agendas and stakeholder lists that we're working with. We have to make our case. This is not just about bringing people together. We're also doing work so that we can help people to understand why it is that we do the work we do. We know you can see all these signs around your community. Some of these may look familiar to you. We know that people who are opposed to affordable housing and new housing production in their communities will come out because they have motivation to do so. What the BU report showed was that people who are supportive are not as they're not as driven to come out because it's not as direct of a link to the advocacy that they're doing. So we as advocates have to make our case. We have a group that comes together monthly to do that. So we would invite you to join us to do this work with us and start this work in your own local community. In the meantime, while you're thinking about how you might create a coalition in your community, I want to encourage you to dig into your local housing data. We love Datatown from our partners at Massachusetts Housing Partnership. Meet with your local planners and elected officials to better understand what they are seeing in the housing climate in your region and in your community. I say this every time I give this presentation, but I'm actually going to bold this next item. Show up to public meetings and speak for more housing and more affordability. That is the number one thing you can do because your voice really matters. You need to send an email to your elected officials. You need to show up at those public meetings. If it's remote, log on and make sure people know that you support these projects and programs, and that starts to build momentum. Definitely push back against myths and any exclusionary language that you hear. Whitney was talking about, you know, the disparate impact, even if people are making comments that aren't on their face discriminatory, but they're saying, well, we don't want this because it's going to bring more school children into our community. Pushing back on those kinds of exclusionary languages. Host an educational forum in your community. It's a great way to get people interested in learning about what you're doing. And more important than anything is just really listening to people with the deepest affordability concerns in your community. I said at the top of this meeting, you know your community better than anyone else. People who are living with housing instability know these concerns better than anyone else, and we need to elevate and empower those voices to be part of the conversation. So I want to turn it over to Sean Ahern is joining us from the Northeast Legal Aid Eviction Defense Outreach Team. If Sean is here and can unmute himself, he was going to speak very briefly about the work that they're doing as we face the end of the eviction moratorium. So Sean, are you available to unmute? There you go.
Yep, I'm here. Hi, everyone. Thanks for turning it over to me. So I'm from Northeast Legal Aid. We are working quite hard. Quite overwhelmed as everyone, I'm sure, working in the housing sphere here in Massachusetts is. There's been a very large wave of evictions being filed since the statewide moratorium expired back in October. It's been not quite a year now, but almost a year now. So the cases have been pouring in for all those who kind of fell behind during COVID, have COVID-related kind of tenancy issues. We've seen a lot of kind of mental health crises that have led to tenancy related issues. something that I think a lot of people weren't necessarily expecting in the same way as the financial issues that have come up. But yeah, there's a lot of need right now, huge wave of evictions that have been filed. So what we've been doing over here is the same sort of eviction defense that we're known for and have been doing. We will take anyone who gets referred our way. So anytime you're with any community partners at meetings anywhere in the Northeast, and I'm talking in the Lowell area, the Lawrence area, the Lynn area, and you hear that someone may be in close contact with tenants or tenants with housing related needs, tenants facing eviction, refer them to Northeast Legal Aid. We do intakes every day, 9 to 5. So we have capacity. It is tough sometimes to manage the caseloads, but we are helping everyone who comes through the door to the best of our abilities right now. Maybe some interesting updates from the world of legal aid. So one fantastic piece of news lately is that Chapter 257, which was the legislation that was passed by the Baker administration for greater, we'll say, rental protections during the COVID state of emergency, has been, some of its provisions have been extended until next year, which is fantastic. The most important of those provisions is that if a tenant has a pending application for rental assistance right now, essentially the eviction process has to be put on hold. So if it's a non-payment case, someone has applied for rental assistance, the case can't go to judgment or go to trial, which is really great and just a great piece of information for everyone to know in the community. It emphasizes the importance of getting people who are behind on rent connected with all of these great rental assistance resources that are available. So that's a great piece of news. That protection, it has been extended until, I believe, April 1st of 2022, which we're really happy to hear. The CDC Moratorium, which is that federal moratorium that everyone keeps talking about, everyone hears about, that's stopping people from being kind of at the end of the process removed from their homes, in most cases is expiring at the end of this month, but there's some breaking news today that I haven't really looked into that it may be extended until the end of July. So we'll all have to wait and see what happens with that. So yeah, we are here. We're doing a lot of eviction defense right now. We're available, doing intakes all the time. We've staffed up a lot through the COVID eviction legal help program. We've almost doubled, if not tripled, the size of our housing unit with the help of the state funds through CHAPA, as it's called. And yeah, if there's any specific questions about kind of the points of law or anything that people are seeing or have, you can always reach out to me. You can reach out to anyone else from Northeast Legal Aid. I'm in the Lowell office. And that's it from me. Thank you, Dana.
And I know that we shared a link to your website in the chat. So please, folks, take a look at that and refer folks if you can. We're going to get to our regional partners. I just want to take a second to acknowledge that Senator Lovely has joined us on this call today. Thank you for being with us and listening to all of this and all the work that we're doing. And I know that Senator Keenan's staff is also on the call. We really appreciate having you with us here today. So we're going to go into regional updates from our partner organizations. First up, we'll have Karen Frederick from Community Teamwork, has some slides that I'll take us through, and then we'll hear from some of the other partners. So Karen, oh, there you are, I can see you.
I'm here. Thank you, Dana. And I just want to thank CHAPA for all the work you and all of the staff are doing in this area. If we didn't know it was so critical before, we certainly know it now. It has been a time like no other. Community Teamwork, just so you have a context, we're a community action agency, a regional housing agency, and a community development corporation, serving about 56,000 people in the region. It's hard to say, you know, we talked about the housing crisis last time I think I was on this, and we've talked about it the time before that. Right now, it feels more like a tsunami. As someone who works in the shelter world with families and individuals, as the administrator of the rental assistance program for the greater Merrimack Valley, we've really seen laid bare in the past 16 months the really deep inequities in our communities in not only housing, but health, education, and economic opportunity. And it all fits together, and housing is a big kind of critical point of that. We all know that. I thought a picture really, is better than 1,000 words. So I'm just going to go through a few slides with you. Community Teamwork does a community needs assessment every 3 years. We finished it pre-pandemic and then layered the pandemic and the racial issues that were so forefront in our communities onto that. So, but this is just some data. The community action agencies all have this. So if you ever need some of this data, please feel free to take a look at ours. It's a really in-depth look at our communities. But when we looked at the vacancy rate, this is just 2010 and compared to 2019. You can see what's happened. Lawrence was already low to start with, and Lowell and Haverhill, the vacancy rates plummeted. We know in Lowell it's even lower than that right now. And next slide. The changes in housing units and population, again, helps to tell the story. In Lowell, the population went up 6,217, and yet we lost 1,044 units. Similarly, Lawrence lost units and gained population. Haverhill gained population and had a slight increase. And again, we know this has changed a little bit since 2019, but I think it gives us a little context. Rent burdened. We know how many people are rent burdened. The red line is Massachusetts, the yellow is the United States. In Lowell, 52.7% of the people are rent burdened, Lawrence 58, and Haverhill 53.7. We know, we used to just deliver the RAF program. We had 4 staff doing it. People would come in one individual crisis at a time. This pushed tens of thousands of people across the Commonwealth into crisis at the same time. Emergency rental assistance households served, and this is not all of fiscal year 2021, but up till fairly recently, we went from 711 in Lowell to 1,170 in Lawrence, from 521 to 1,361, and in Haverhill from 273 to 509. And the next slide is the amount of money that represents. So in Lowell, we distributed so far in fiscal year 21, not the whole year, 6,311,000, and Lawrence 8,491,000, and in Haverhill $2,980,000. It's really an incredible explosion of need. And I have to thank our partners who have worked with us across the region. In Lawrence, Greater Lawrence Community Action Council, thank you, Evelyn. And also Jess Andors, Community Works, and in Haverhill, Kerry Perry at Community Action Inc. This made sure that we were reaching all of our communities in the most appropriate way. So without the help of our partners, this would have been even more difficult. And we at Community Teamwork went from 4 staff to 30 to process this work. So the needs in our community are just so deep and great. As I look at your agenda at CHAPA, certainly it showed the need for more long-term rental assistance, and that the crisis has really exposed the fragility that so many people live with in our area.
Thank you so much, Karen. I say this every time, like I shouldn't be surprised by some of these numbers, but sometimes I still am shocked by the need that is out there, and also impressed by how quickly you guys pivoted to serve that need. So thank you. Our next up are our regional partners. We want to hear from the folks at Harbor Light Community Partners. I know we have Rosa and Andrew joining us. So if you could unmute yourself. Here's Rosa.
Hi, Dana. So I think Andrew might have signed off already. So
okay, great.
You're stuck with me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What would you like me to discuss? Just everything that I wanted to share today, or
yeah, if you could just share some of your thoughts on what the region is facing and the challenges and strategies you've been working on.
Sure. So I think like many other organizations, there was a lot to learn this year, and some of the things we kind of already knew, and some of the things really exposed the cracks, I think, in our systems. So, we have a fragmented infrastructure of public health and systems as related to housing. Our public health systems are not equipped to handle emergencies, and that put very vulnerable people in very precarious positions. And they were already in those positions, right? It just kind of exacerbated it. And I think our desire to give autonomy by municipality really provides limited infrastructure and makes it difficult to care for people, makes it difficult for Board of Health guidance to be consistent, especially for us as a CDC where we operate in a lot of different cities and towns. Just like zoning, the guidance we received from the Board of Health was very different, and having to kind of learn the rules and how to navigate those things really took a lot of time. I think the absence in the guidance of what we could do or couldn't do and trying to implement things with the systems to guide us really impacted our ability to navigate a lot of the challenges as quickly as we would have liked to. I think the other thing that really just kind of was cemented for us, and it's kind of unfortunately a negative thing, is just because people say they're concerned about something doesn't mean that they're going to take steps to remedy those things. So we've seen this time and time again with zoning, right? But the resistance to zoning reform or changing access to housing doesn't seem to be diminished despite the two crises that we experienced last year as a world, racial inequity and public health crisis. You know, it just didn't really change the narrative as much as we thought it would. I think after such a difficult year, there were a couple of challenges I want to highlight and what we overcame. So virtual education was really effective and expanded access for us when it came to reaching our residents, but also our first-time homebuyer programs. We saw supportive housing was really effective in managing this health crisis. And, you know, we hope to see more intentionality to change the systems and encourage blending of housing and other supportive services for elders and for families. We want to create more housing. That's not a surprise to anybody on this call. You know, housing is everything. It kept us safe from a pandemic or not safe. It allowed us to work from home if we had the privilege of doing so, or not work from home. Those MBTA communities that we want to create, more multifamily housing in by right, are great, but we want it everywhere. Supportive housing was really crucial to navigating COVID, and it was just ripped everything open for us of what we can do and what we should be doing. The last thing I just want to highlight is we want to see towns take measurable steps to match words and inequity that we saw during 2020. So we want to use that renewed energy as a pendulum and avoid an overly brief sense of awareness of the racial inequity. You know, everything from the Black Lives Matter movement, George Floyd, COVID, all of the data we've seen over and over on how it's affected communities of color and low-income communities despairingly. We want to actually use that to improve our systems and level the playing field. That's a big goal. So I guess I'll pause there. I have a lot more things to share, but I know we're at 2:30, so let me know if you would like me to share anything else.
That was, first of all, Rosa, thank you for all the work that you guys have done. And I think your last comment really resonates with me. We don't want this to be a moment. We want it to be a movement. We've heard from people. We are, you know, bringing things, we're moving forward better than we were before. And how do we use the momentum of this moment to really make that systemic change? So I really appreciate all the work you guys are doing at Harbor Light. Would love to turn it over to Jim Wild from Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership to share what you guys have been experiencing.
Hi, Dana, thanks so much. And like Karen Frederick, I'd really like to applaud CHAPA for doing unbelievable work during this time. That was so inspiring to see your presentations about everything that's happening and really practical tools for people. So I can speak to home ownership in general. We at the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership, our main focus is home buyer education. The big thing that we've seen, like a lot of the agencies, is just enormous classes this whole year since the pandemic hit. We're on track to graduate 1,000 families this year, and you know, despite the fact that it's tougher and tougher to become a homeowner with the prices and shortage of inventory, there's no shortage of people who want to buy. And what we're seeing in the Lowell area is a lot of people moving up from within 128 up to this area because it is more affordable. And we're seeing a lot of the people here being not being able to afford here anymore and moving out further to Fitchburg, Leominster, Southern New Hampshire. I mean, the median sales price for a house in Lowell is now about $425,000. So what we've seen, a few things that have been really wonderful is things like the Mass Housing Workforce Advantage 2.0 program. I mean, programs like that combined with the down payment assistance programs that we administer have really made homeownership doable for some people. And one interesting thing, since we've switched over to everything virtual, we've been wondering about what are we going to do after this is over. Are we going to go back to the classroom? And so I've polled the last couple of classes. We've had about 100 people respond to our poll during the class. When the pandemic is over, should we bring back classes in person, or do you think it would be better to keep it on Zoom? Well, we've had over about 92 and 94% of those classes said keep Zoom. People love it. They love the convenience. I was really kind of stunned by how high that number was, but that kind of answers the question about what we're going to be doing going forward. And I'm sure we'll do a hybrid and we'll do an in-person class here and there. But I mean, I think people are really sick of Zoom in doing their jobs. But when it comes to doing something like a home buyer training class, it's really convenient. One of the things that I want to mention that is it's really near to my heart is the Homeownership Collaborative. Elizabeth Palmer Diaz from CHAPA just recently we did a survey of all of the 40 plus counseling agencies around the state that do home buyer training for 2020, and we had almost everybody responded. So between all of us, we had about 15,000 people go through our classes in 2020. And the demographic, this really highlights the racial disparities that are out there. Of the graduates that went through, these 15,000 people who went through home buyer training classes this past year, 33% were white, 28% were Latinx, 25% were Black, 5% were Asian. So basically 33% were white. Now you compare that to the home ownership in Massachusetts. Across Massachusetts, 85% of the homes that are owned by white families. So 33% graduated from our classes, but comprise 85% of all the homes that are actually owned. Only 4% of the homes in Massachusetts are owned by African Americans, 5% by Latinx, and 5% Asian. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's just so deplorable. And so when you think about how effective we are collectively in educating people and getting people into responsible home ownership, I mean, can you imagine how much worse those numbers would be if we weren't here year after year pumping out those buyers? So, but that's, I mean, I think, now that we have some, some real numbers, now we can, maybe get some more, more focus on this. And just to close now, a couple of the things that we're working on here at Lowell just recently passed the CPA program. And so we're pushing for Lowell to adopt or replicate the 1+ Boston program. We'd love to have the 1+ Lowell program, where some of the CPA funds would be used to buy down the interest rates on the mortgages. And that would be a really cool thing, because we're also finding, we administer the down payment assistance program, the federally funded home program for the city of Lowell. And we're finding that harder and harder to successfully close those because of the regulations, because of the prices and all of that. And if we had something like the 1+ Lowell program, I mean, we can give a lot more assistance and with less red tape, less strings, less regulations, and probably, more volume. So those are some of the things that we're working on, but we just need more inventory and lower prices. So good luck, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jim. And I see some comments coming in the chat. We are going to go to the audience very shortly. One more community partner who is going to speak now, Jeff Whedon from the Lynn Housing Coalition.
Thank you, Dana, and thank you, CHAPA, for putting this on, and also for the work you've done and the great work, especially over the pandemic years going into it now. But I want to update a couple major points, similar to what Karen was talking about. Is our rental assistance program, our Family Success Center, that has seen an explosion, as Karen has said. In our regional piece, we were able to help about 1,200 families, upwards of $9.1 million to get that out on the street, in and around. That's the regional piece in and around Lynn. Lynn specific was about half of that, so 620 or so families and 4.5 million to the Lynn community. So that was one big piece. We've hired double-digit numbers to try to make sure that we stay on top of that. We get that money out as quick as possible between IRMA, ERAP, and RAFT. So that was one big update for the city and the region. The other one going on in Lynn now is the housing production plan that's been going on throughout the pandemic months. It started actually in the fall. The kickoff was fall of 19. And the reason the city did that, even though City of Lynn is at 12.5% SHI, we have been seeing a lot of development coming. We've been seeing a lot specifically in the downtown, in the waterfront, and we wanted to make sure that safeguards were put into place. And our need for affordable housing is very evident. So we moved forward and we went forward with this housing production plan. And I have to say, as you know, we just wrapped it up, but it hasn't gone in front of the city council just yet, hasn't been approved. But just as important as the recommendations that came out of it, I think, is the importance of the process of going through it. And part of that was engaging and becoming one of the municipal engagement communities. And that really helped keep that momentum and keep pushing that ball rolling forward, specifically as we had to shift from having the in-person meetings into Zoom meetings. So having to do a monthly Zoom meeting in the evening, it was challenging, but we made it work and we were able to do some coalition building. We had the largest developer in the city of Lynn working with advocates, with residents, with renters. So we had that cross sector and a lot of people working together to keep that momentum going. So now, you know, as we move forward, the momentum's there. We have a final plan. We've had multiple engagements, public engagements, and now we're about to go in front of the city council. So it's been a long ride, and we're really hoping that this gets passed because there's a lot of good pieces in there: inclusionary zoning, affordable housing trust funds, some things that the city really needs. And we think that could be a really big help, especially, you know, as Rosa mentioned, the having see the cracks now that have really come to, you know, out through the pandemic. So something that the city really needs.
Thanks, Jeff. And as a quick plug, if you or someone you know lives in Lynn, or you have a network in Lynn, let folks know, contact their city councilor and ask them to move forward with that housing production plan. I'm sorry I didn't see Jess Andors on here from Lawrence Community Works, but if someone else from Lawrence Community Works wanted to speak, I would welcome you to speak now. I don't know if anyone is. And our other community partner, but thank you to Lawrence Community Works for being co-partners and regional partners in this work. Oh, Erica, thank you. Did you want to speak?
Hi, good afternoon. Well, here in Lawrence Community Works, we have been also experienced different levels of challenges. I echo some of the voices that we've heard out there. We're really excited to we're just being really innovative and creative and trying to assist as many folks as possible. Our community is just like Lynn and other urban communities have its challenges with the language barriers and technology. And as an organization, we've done a great job to try to adapt the best that we can to the current environment that we're in. Also, Lawrence Community Works, along with 25 other organizations in the community, is part of a financial and housing working group, and we had the opportunity to also start educating our city council members and other decision makers in the community of the importance of keeping in mind that when all this funding that we're excited about that's going to be coming down the pipeline, that we're still going to need more aid here in the community of Lawrence for both homeowners and renters. And affordability is a challenge, and also looking at ways of not just helping folks with one-time rental assistance. How can we sustain tenancies in the long run? So that's kind of been some of the focus, especially this current environment. How can we not just give out aid, how can we create some sort of sustainability plan so folks can really have a longer, sorry, it's been a long day, so they can have a better chance of being housed long term.
Thank you so much, Erica. And I think back to the chart that Karen had showed about the cost burden in Lawrence and the great work that you guys are doing at Lawrence Community Works to change that, to flip that a bit and help build stability. So I really appreciate the work you're doing. Mickey Northcutt sends his apologies. He had to run. He's from North Shore CDC. He was planning to speak, but had to run for an emergency. But sends his regards and noted he would probably echo many of the other comments from the regional partners. Want to just open it up to comments and questions from the chat. I saw a couple of comments in the chat about kind of what we're hearing from the community, a shift in tactics away from, you know, more racially tinged arguments, you know, now that is clearly unacceptable to say that it was ever acceptable, but you know, that the narrative that we're seeing changing. Anna, I see your hand up. Could you speak to that a little bit more about what you're seeing?
Yeah, you bet. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I'm wandering around doing a million things, so I'm not going to turn my camera on because it would be like the Blair Witch Project for you. So I'll just keep that off.
That's perfectly fine.
So I'm from Hamilton Affordable Housing Advocates, and I'm also on the board for Abundant Housing Massachusetts, and I'm the president of the Hamilton Wyndham Human Rights Coalition. And what I would say, if you triangulate all those different ears to the ground, we're seeing here, particularly in regard to a project that is it's not even affordable. People are really doubling down on the environmental argument. And I think it's because they do recognize that any tacit arguments against lower income housing and those people, that kind of language was always out of bounds, but now it is out of bounds even in mainstream America. So that's a net win. Like, that's a good thing for global humanity. But I feel what's happening as it returns to development is people are really doubling down on the environmental side. So I can foresee that argument being used more aggressively here in these kind of communities than it had been before. So I think we're just going to have to be aware of that one of those arguments for fair housing is sort of an inclusivity component that's going away. And I think in its place is becoming this other red herring is coming to the forefront. So I guess what I would like to see is, to some degree, as much as possible, one of the things I'm thinking about are sort of building stronger alliances with some of the protected land space groups like Essex County Greenbelt, the trustees, you know, some of the communities groups here who tend to gobble up green space as a net good, but to the excess of other kinds of things. And I'm just sort of looking ahead at some point where the housing developers and the environmentalists often struggle, but I can actually see those value propositions combining in a sort of intersectional negative way, if that makes sense. So I think that's something we should just be on the lookout for and to try to get ahead of those arguments when they come to the front. Because that's a disturbing trend in sort of, you know, the Pinot Grigio swilling communities like Hamilton and Wenham and a lot of North Shore places up here.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point and so core to what we try to do through our municipal engagement work is build out that stakeholder group. So in the conversations about housing and affordability, we absolutely should have environmental groups and groups concerned about sustainability and open space, because there can be some overlapping goals and also goals that might seem to be at odds with each other, but if we can work together, we will definitely be stronger. So thank you for raising that, Anna.
Yeah, well, and if I could just also add, I think for the MBTA communities, that's where you can push back on it a little bit more aggressively and talk about the transit component and the admissions component. And I think there's a way around it. I just think we have to be that much smarter. So
yeah, and a lot of the tools we have at our disposal now, leaning into those tools, absolutely.
100%.
Nate, I know you had a comment also on kind of the anti-housing sentiment that you see. Despite how important we've all seen housing to be in this moment, there's this anti-housing sentiment coming up.
Right. So for my background, I work for the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission. We're a regional planning agency representing 15 municipalities here in the Merrimack Valley, from sort of Lawrence to the ocean and as far south as Raleigh. So gateway cities, rural communities, coastal communities, we've got a pretty good mix. And we've been seeing kind of a rising anti-housing sentiment, market rate, affordable, just anti-housing period across the board, I would say, in all of our municipalities. To the tune that, North Andover just narrowly defeated a housing moratorium proposal. And we're seeing sort of that drumbeat from other anti-housing sort of coalitions maybe forming in other municipalities. So it's something that we're really cognizant of. Obviously, we produce housing production plans and we try to work really collaboratively with municipalities to plan for housing, but we're not doing enough, clearly. So we're trying to figure out ways to better partner. This municipal engagement initiative is something that's definitely very interesting to us and something we see as potentially really valuable. So, thank you for hosting this. It's been really great to listen to. And I did want to mention really kind of quickly is the housing economics have changed over here, especially in our gateway communities. 5 years ago, you couldn't do a market rate project in Lawrence or Haverhill. And those numbers have changed. We've seen a lot of market rate new construction in Haverhill. We're beginning to see some of that in Lawrence. It's not just affordable housing kind of mill conversions. You're seeing a lot of now new construction, which is great, but I kind of wonder out loud if that has just changed the perception of housing in general. It's much more visible now, and it changes the political calculus locally a lot. So we've been seeing that shift has happened over the course of like 5 years. And I think it's kind of speculating here, but I think it's kind of changed the politics a little bit.
Yeah, great points, Nate. Yeah, I think you're echoing what they're seeing in Lynn, as Jeff mentioned as well. I'm going to ask Lily to throw in the chat her office hours for communities that are thinking about trying to start a municipal engagement coalition. It's a good first place to start. And if we can't assist, we can connect you with some of our other partners. I know Anna's part of Abundant Housing. We've got our partners at MHP, all kinds of resources out there. I see one more comment in the chat from Bonnie about supporting folks who have lost their homes and apartments due to fire. Bonnie, did you want to add more to that? I can't see you if your hand is raised. I don't see you right now, but if you wanted to unmute and speak to that issue as well, that would be helpful.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so, I try to listen in as housing as much as I can. And honestly, primarily because being a volunteer with the Red Cross, we have to help everybody that's been displaced by a fire, or we want to. And we find it extremely difficult to find housing, or to help these folks find housing after a fire. And, there's no shortage of fires, but there's certainly shortage housing. And, just being able to have these conversations today, or listening in on these conversations today, and all these organizations and agencies that are part of this, really kind of brings promise to me that there are folks out there. I mean, we have a great partner agencies that we use, community teamworks and stuff like that. But sometimes we blow up these agencies, and folks are still waiting. They're waiting to get calls back, or they're waiting to get through all the paperwork and stuff like that. So if there was, like a list that folks work on that says, okay, now these are all the agencies, so that would be able to help support housing, not necessarily find housing right away for people, but support them and advocating and so forth for housing, because we're all one disaster away from being homeless. And then a lot of times, these folks, maybe they didn't have to pay security deposit, first month's rent, because their landlords were great. And then you have the other landlords that won't even answer their phone. So these folks can get some of that money back, so they can try to find alternate housing. So, I just threw that out there because, I'm kind of new. I'm not new to volunteering with the Red Cross, but I'm new to listening in on these housing things to try to see how, we can help all these families that are being displaced.
Thank you, Bonnie, for raising that. It's a really critically important point. And I think, you know, what you said, to sum it up, we are all one crisis away from homelessness. And I think that puts a lot of it into perspective for me. This is not about someone else. This is about all of us and our ability to stay housed. Rosa had her hand up. We have probably time for one or two more comments. So Rosa.
Sure. Thanks. I know we had a different shift just now, but when Nate was speaking about the moratorium proposed in North Andover and the perception that new construction has kind of had, there was also comments earlier about environment issues or concerns being utilized as anti-housing sentiments. And while these aren't new, I think that there definitely is an increase of those in varied fashion. So in Salem, we saw all of those issues over the last year and a half. And it was interesting because, as some of you might know, the ADU ordinance was proposed 3 times in Salem, and it did not pass until the housing choice legislation went in as part of the economic development bill, lowering the majority for a zoning change. And it was an interesting experience for HCP to be involved in the ADU conversation and trying to advocate and get you know, residents to call into public meeting and show up, everything we already have heard about. And when we highlighted, you know, ADUs are the least invasive to the environment. You know, they are oftentimes not new construction. They are the best thing we can do. There wasn't really a very strong rebuttal, other than it came back down to the usual stuff about, you know, the ruining the characteristics of neighborhoods. And there was a moratorium that was also proposed here that did not survive, did not go to committee, did not get voted on by the city council. But I just wanted to, I guess, offer Nate just a little bit of support there, that it's definitely increasing. And I think we've seen the success of statewide advocacy with housing and with vaccine access for people living in affordable housing, all of those things. And I think this might be another one of those opportunities for all of us to work together and combat that.
Great points, Rosa, really. And the persistence of the work that you all did in Salem has been, I know, inspiring to a lot of other communities. So thank you for sharing that experience. So we're just about at time. I want to just do another call. I don't see any more questions or comments in the chat, but I do want to just share a couple more things with all of you before we go. Just to reiterate again, we really do want you to join our CHAPA committees. There is a committee for you and for your perspective. We also would love to have you sign up to get our monthly housing briefs, go to our MEI office hours, join our Making the Case calls monthly. You can find out about all of these by going to our website or contacting myself, Lily, Whitney, any of us here from CHAPA on the call today. Just want to really thank you for joining us today, for all the work that you do, and looking forward to continuing doing this with you in the coming year. Thanks so much.